When we look back at the grand sweep of history, there is this very entrenched assumption that influence always flows from the top down.
Yeah, that is definitely the standard model we are all taught.
We tend to think that the kings, the academic scholars, the people with access to the grand libraries, they're the ones who write the rules.
And they shape the culture, while the rest of the world, the everyday people, just sort of fall into line and absorb it.
Yeah, we rarely expect the dynamic to run in reverse. But then you start digging into the historical landscape of the 16th century Lombardy Alps, and that entire top-down model just completely collapses.
It really does. We are looking at a set of circumstances where the center of gravity shifts entirely.
The influence flows from the absolute bottom to the very top.
It is a profound inversion of how power and influence are supposed to work.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. I'm your host, and we are thrilled you are sitting in with us today because we have a truly fascinating stack of sources to unpack for you.
I am so glad to be here to help go through this material. We are looking at a remarkable collection of historical records, biographies, and translated spiritual writings.
And all of this material centers entirely around one historical figure, Blessed Thomas of Olera, or, as he was known before he took his vows, Thomas of Olera.
Our mission today is to explore the core paradox of his life, because it is quite a paradox.
It really is. We are talking about a man who started out as an illiterate shepherd boy from a tiny, impoverished Italian village.
And he became a Capuchin lay brother, tasked with basic manual labor.
Yet this same man went on to counsel emperors. He wrote profound theological masterpieces, like the book Foco d'Amore, which translates to Fire of Love.
He also anticipated major global Catholic devotions by decades.
And perhaps most astonishingly, centuries later, he had his dictated writings read aloud to a pope on his deathbed.
The goal for our discussion today is not merely to recount a dry chronological biography. We want to take you on an intensive look into his inner world.
We want to explore his intense prayer life, his deep, consuming affection for Jesus and the Virgin Mary.
And how that internal fire translated into a radical, incredibly effective love for sinners in the streets.
We are looking at a man whose internal life was so vast, so overwhelming, that it's essentially spilled over and altered the landscape of his time.
So let us start by setting the scene, because you really cannot understand Thomas without understanding where he came from.
We are in the village of Allegra. The year is 1563.
For some historical context, the records note that this is the exact same year the Council of Trent was closing.
So imagine the state of the world you are living in. The Catholic Church is undergoing massive, sweeping internal reforms.
The Protestant Reformation is tearing across Europe, redrawing borders and alliances.
There is immense geopolitical and religious upheaval happening everywhere.
And amidst all of this earth-shattering drama in the grand cities, a boy is born in a cluster of poor stone houses sitting about 500 meters up in the mountains.
Olera was a place of deep, grinding poverty.
Thomas was born to a family that actually had ancient roots of nobility, but by the time he came along, they were completely impoverished.
Until he was 17 years old, his entire world consisted of the grueling work of a peasant and a shepherd.
He would spend his days up in the rugged grazing lands tending sheep. There were no schools in Olera.
He had zero formal education.
The biographical sources tell us his mother taught him the absolute basics of faith in the evenings after he returned from the fields. But he remained completely illiterate.
Imagine you were out there in those pastures, entirely removed from the academic theological debates happening in places like Rome or Vienna.
You are just surrounded by silence, rock, and sheep.
But the sources strongly suggest that the grazing land was where the groundwork for his intense spiritual life was actually laid.
He was already engaging in deep, solitary prayer while watching the flocks. The isolation wasn't empty for him, it was full.
And then, in 1580, at the age of 17, he makes a massive, life-altering decision.
He leaves his family, leaves the sheep, and walks all the way to Verona to knock on the door of the Capuchin Franciscans.
He walked there to join the order specifically as a lay brother.
It helps to understand the structure of the Capuchins at that time. You had clerical friars who were studying theology and preparing to be priests.
And then you had the lay brothers.
They were the ones who performed all the manual labor necessary to keep the friaries functioning. They were cooks, porters, and questors.
The questors were tasked with going out into the towns to beg for alms to feed the community. It was a life of profound servitude.
Here is where we encounter the first major exception of his life, a detail in the friary records that really stands out.
The rule of St. Francis strictly forbade teaching illiterate brothers to read and write.
The underlying logic was to preserve their humility. They wanted to keep lay brothers focused on simple service, rather than letting them get caught up in academic ambition.
But during Thomas's novitiate, the superiors changed their minds.
The superiors in Verona recognized something so extraordinary in his spiritual depth that they made a deliberate exception to that rule.
They actually taught him basic literacy.
They saw a profound, infused wisdom in this young man. They realized he had an understanding of God far beyond his education.
So he decided he needed the basic tools to express it, even if his grammar and spelling remained rudimentary for the rest of his life.
It speaks volumes about the sheer force of his presence.
You have these seasoned religious superiors looking at this 17-year-old shepherd and essentially deciding to break their own rules for him.
What he had inside him needed a way out.
And once he is fully in the order, he begins to engage in a level of physical asceticism that is, frankly, almost difficult for us to comprehend today.
He was constantly seeking ways to humble himself. He ate very sparingly.
He slept only 3 hours a night.
He went barefoot constantly, even later in his life when he was living in the freezing cold of Tyrol in the Austrian Alps.
And he scourged himself with iron chains. He even had a specific phrase for his own physical body.
He referred to it dismissively as the beast.
The historical accounts recount that his fellow novices actually gave him a nickname because of this intensity.
They called him Volcano.
Wow, volcano. Not because he was angry, though, right? I mean, not because he had a bad temper.
No, not at all. It was because of the massive eruptive intensity he displayed when he prayed.
He was like a mountain containing a fire that simply could not be contained.
His ascetic practices seem incredibly extreme to us now, but they were his specific way of taming the beast so his spirit could ascend.
He didn't want to be weighed down by physical comforts or earthly attachments.
I know you found an interesting analogy in his writings regarding that harsh treatment of his body.
Yeah, I kept getting hung up on that phrase, the beast, because it sounds so harsh. It sounds like a rejection of the physical self.
It does sound jarring to modern ears.
But as I read through his own translated writings, I found an analogy he uses that completely reframes it. He writes that God is like an expert sculptor.
And the human soul is the raw material.
Yes, and he says the sculptor has to throw the material into the fire and beat it with a hammer to mold it into a perfect container for virtue.
That is a very vivid image.
When I think about it that way, a sculptor doesn't hate the marble. The sculptor loves the marble enough to chisel away everything that isn't the masterpiece.
It's just that the chiseling process is inherently violent.
Yes, it isn't a gentle process, but a violent forging. Treating his body as the beast was about subjugating the lower passions.
He is emptying the vessel so it can be filled with something entirely different.
Which leads us to the next massive piece of his story. How does a man who treats himself with such relentless physical severity experience such profound internal sweetness?
Because the joy and the ecstasy he describes in his writings are overwhelming.
This brings us directly into the mechanics of his extraordinary prayer life.
His commitment to mental prayer was unwavering. For nearly 50 years of his life, his official job was a quester.
This meant walking miles upon miles every single day, going from door to door in various towns, begging for bread, oil, and wine.
It was exhausting, physically demanding, often humiliating work. Yet the Capuchin constitutions mandated 2 hours of mental prayer every day.
And the biographies are explicit about this. Despite his grueling schedule walking the streets, he never missed those 2 hours.
If he was interrupted by the demands of the day, what he rather colorfully dismissed as worldly flies buzzing around him.
Worldly flies. I love that description for daily distractions.
It is very fitting. But if those flies interrupted him, he infallibly made the time up at night.
He would sacrifice the meager 3 hours of sleep he allowed himself, rather than sacrifice his designated time with God.
He actively sought out solitary places to do this. He wrote about the necessity of finding empty cells, quiet oratories, shaded valleys, and dark caves.
He wanted environments where the external world could be shut out entirely.
And in those isolated environments, he entered into states of profound mystical ecstasy. He describes a state of contemplation that results in swooning and fainting.
He called them agonies of love.
Agonies of love. It captures the paradox of his experience so perfectly.
It hurts specifically because it is so beautiful. The human frame can barely hold it.
He described this state as a martyrdom of love that lasts a lifetime. He compared it to the biblical story from the book of Daniel.
The 3 youths, thrown into the fiery furnace of Babylon by the king.
Yes, just as they lived and walked amidst the flames without being consumed, Thomas says the soul in deep contemplation is thrown into a furnace of divine love.
The soul is consumed by the fire, yet not destroyed by it. It is sustained by the very flames that are burning it.
The physical manifestations of this state were so intense that his contemporaries frequently documented them.
There's that anecdote in the Friary records noting that he would sometimes become so deeply immersed in this prayer that he had to be forcefully struck by his brothers.
Just to be awakened from his ecstatic trance, he was entirely disconnected from his physical surroundings.
He even noted once that an 8-hour stretch of deep contemplation felt to him like a single hour.
Time itself just dilated and collapsed for him.
This deep, almost suspended immersion is really the only way we can understand his writing process.
As we established earlier, he was barely literate. His spelling was atrocious, and his grammar was highly irregular.
Yet the theological depth, the sheer poetry of his treatises is staggering.
A fellow friar meticulously documented how Thomas actually wrote these books. After receiving communion, Thomas would retreat to his cell and begin writing.
Afterward, Thomas would openly confess to his brothers that he himself did not understand how he could have put those things on paper.
He wrote mechanically. He was entirely absorbed in God, functioning almost as a conduit.
The friars noted that he frequently went on writing without stopping to think or compose his thoughts.
When he finally did review what he had written, he realized it was exactly what was on his mind, imparted to him during prayer.
You know, when I try to picture this intense isolation, the hours spent hiding in caves, the swooning, the detachment from time, I found myself asking what the purpose of it all was.
It is a valid question. Is it just a form of spiritual escapism?
Yeah, like, is he just hiding from the difficulty and the messiness of the 16th century world?
But he isn't running away.
Think about a deep-sea diver. When a diver puts on weights and plunges into the dark, freezing depths, they aren't doing it to escape the noise on the deck of the boat.
They are holding their breath and going down there with a highly specific mission.
They are diving to the very bottom to retrieve pearls of immense value, and then they endure the ascent to bring those pearls back up to share with everyone else.
Thomas is diving into the depths of prayer to bring back these insights.
So what exactly was he looking at in the deep?
He wasn't meditating on abstract philosophical concepts. His contemplation was entirely focused on the physical and spiritual suffering of Jesus.
Which brings us to one of his most famous quotes. He stated, "I have never read a syllable of books, but I strive to read the suffering Christ."
The crucifix was his ultimate textbook.
He outlines a very specific, deliberate method for this contemplation. He instructs the believer to begin by gazing at the bleeding head of Christ,
Then moving methodically to the pierced hands, the wounded feet, and finally coming to rest on the great wound in the side.
He treats every single aspect of the Passion as a source of deep nourishment.
He wrote that every divine mystery is like a meal, and the individual points of meditation are like mouthfuls that ought to be chewed one by one.
Chewed to extract their full flavor and good nourishment. He is wringing every drop of meaning out of the physical reality of the crucifixion.
But here is where we hit a massive historical point, something in the timelines that is truly surprising.
Thomas is writing extensively, with incredible theological precision, about the heart of Jesus in the early 1600s.
We are talking about 50 years before the famous visions of St. Margaret Mary Alacoque.
You have this illiterate shepherd from the Alps anticipating a major global shift in Catholic devotion by half a century.
The depth of his writing on the heart of Jesus is astounding. He makes a crucial theological distinction between the external passion and the internal passion.
The external passion meaning the physical crucifixion,
Yeah.
the nails, the thorns.
And the internal passion being the unseen anguish of Christ's heart. To explain this, he uses an incredibly vivid metaphor.
He describes the heart of Jesus as the center of a target.
The center of a target, when you picture that, the imagery is so tactile.
He is saying that the physical body of Christ, his humanity, suffered in all its various members.
The hands felt the nails, the head felt the thorns.
But if you picture an archery target, an arrow can hit the outer rings, the extremities.
But the vibration, the force, the ultimate shock of every single strike travels inward to the bullseye.
Every pain felt in the hands or feet was ultimately bound to travel inward and wound his heart incomparably more.
The heart is the ultimate receptacle absorbing all the shock waves of the world's suffering.
It is a masterful theological image.
And because the heart is the ultimate center of the suffering, Thomas argues that it demands a different kind of response from the believer.
He urged his readers to weep tears of water over the external passion of the Lord.
But he urged them to weep tears of blood with their inner eyes over the internal passion, over that immense heart.
He saw the blood and water flowing from the pierced side of Christ as the ultimate overflow of love.
It was the breaking of a container that could simply no longer hold the immense charity contained within it.
He describes the physical wound in the side as the entrance to the Holy of Holies of divine love.
You can enter through the wound to get to the heart.
And this intense focus on the physical reality of Christ's love naturally extended to his fierce devotion to the Eucharist.
For Thomas, the Eucharist was the continuation of that exact same self-emptying love.
He openly lamented the spiritual state of his time, noting that people spoke often of prayer, but rarely gave proper attention to the Holy Sacrament.
He urged believers to visit the tabernacle day and night.
The language he uses to describe the mechanism of the Eucharist is incredibly powerful.
He says that nowhere do we find the Savior more tender or loving than in the sacrament, where he annihilates himself.
That specific word annihilates carries so much weight.
He reduces himself to food in order to penetrate our souls and to unite himself to the hearts of his friends.
To reduce the creator of all things into a piece of bread so that he can physically enter our bodies. It is an overwhelming concept.
Thomas believed that by adoring the hidden purity in the sacrament, the believer would physically and spiritually become pure.
It is a theology of total transformation through proximity and consumption.
This overwhelming affection for Christ naturally overflowed into a deep veneration for the Virgin Mary.
His logic was simple but profound. If Jesus gave his heart to humanity on the cross, Mary is the one who originally gave Jesus his human heart in the womb.
The sources refer to Thomas as a poet of the Immaculate Virgin. His Marian devotion was entirely integral to his understanding of Christ.
He defended the concepts of her Immaculate Conception and her Assumption into heaven centuries before they were officially declared dogmas by the Catholic Church.
This is a crucial detail. He is mapping out these major Marian doctrines long before the highest levels of the Church formalized them.
I am just marveling at the confidence of this uneducated friar.
He is essentially navigating complex theological territory before the academic scholars in Rome even get there.
It reminds me of someone who is a naturally brilliant musician but cannot read a single note of sheet music.
Oh, that is a great comparison.
If you put a complex academic symphony score in front of him, he cannot read the notation.
But if he just hears the music once, he can sit at the piano and play the entire symphony perfectly by ear.
Thomas couldn't read the academic theology, but he perfectly heard the theology of Mary through the silent music of his deep prayer.
His understanding was infused by God's providence. He wrote about Mary not just as a historical figure, but as the first and most perfect adorer of the Blessed Sacrament.
He had this incredible vision of her life after the ascension of Jesus.
He saw her remaining on earth as the mother and teacher of the early church, actively seeking out the places where the Eucharist was reserved.
Prostrating herself in the profoundest humility. He saw her as the absolute template for how every Christian should approach God.
And his devotion to her was not confined to his writings. It had actual physical manifestations in the real world.
He was the driving force behind the construction of a major Marian sanctuary in Volders, a town in Tyrol.
He conceived the idea, rallied the support, and saw it through. That church still stands today as a national monument in Austria.
It demonstrates a core truth about his life. His internal fire always demanded external action.
The heat he gathered in his solitary contemplation could not remain hidden.
If his love for God and the Virgin Mary constituted the vertical beam of the cross in his life, reaching upward,
then his love for his fellow man constituted the horizontal beam, reaching outward.
and that horizontal beam was forged on the dirty, dangerous streets during his 50 years as a quaestor.
Imagine what that actually looked like. Walking the rutted dirt roads of 16th and 17th century Italy and Austria.
Year after year in the freezing cold and the blazing heat.
His official duty was begging. He carried a coarse sack for bread and hollowed out dried gourds for oil and wine.
He knocked on heavy wooden doors, asking for food to sustain the friars and the desperate poor.
But the sources are explicit about his true motive.
As he begged for bread to keep bodies alive, he was secretly begging for souls to keep them from eternal ruin.
He used the simple, everyday interaction at the doorstep as an entry point into the deepest spiritual lives of the people he met.
He encountered absolutely everyone on those streets. The wealthy nobility, the destitute, the deeply pious, and the notoriously sinful.
And he approached them all with a radical, disarming authenticity that cut through all social pretenses.
The historical records contain several specific stories that illustrate his method.
The story of the prostitute in Vicenza is a perfect example of this dynamic in action.
Thomas is walking his usual route, begging for alms. He learns from the whispers of the neighbors about a specific woman living in the area.
Most people in that era would avoid that door like the plague or hurl condemnations at her windows.
But Thomas, he walks right up and knocks on her door.
She opens the door, likely expecting the standard transaction. She expects to give this beggar a piece of bread and send him on his way.
But Thomas refuses the transaction. He makes it clear he is not there for the bread.
He looks directly at her and tells her to go into her room, shut the door, and ask what Jesus Christ wants of her.
He doesn't yell at her. He doesn't shame her with the town's gossip. He forces her to look inward.
And the impact of that quiet, piercing confrontation is immediate. The sources record that her heart simply melted.
She returned to the door, weeping like a Magdalene.
She completely converted her life on the spot, abandoning her profession, and spent the rest of her days living a life of rigorous penance.
He used the humble guise of a beggar to slip past her defenses and deliver a spiritual shock to her system.
We see a very similar yet socially different dynamic with the Neapolitan gentleman in Vicenza.
This man was a nobleman, a cavalier.
He was living with a woman out of wedlock, and they had children together. He flatly refused to marry her because she was poor.
Marrying her was considered beneath his elevated social station. Thomas learns of this injustice and decides to confront the man.
A nobleman in that era does not take kindly to being lectured on morality by an illiterate beggar wearing a rough habit.
The power dynamic is completely lopsided. The sources say the man put up a massive, fierce resistance.
He fought back. He likely threatened Thomas.
But Thomas did not back down an inch. He used highly effective persuasion.
He relentlessly appealed to the man's conscience, systematically tearing down his pride until the man finally broke under the weight of the truth.
He married the woman, legitimized his children, and lived a reformed life from then on.
However, his interventions were not always met with tears of conversion. He frequently faced profound humiliation and sudden violence.
There is a very stark record of an angry man who, instead of giving alms when Thomas knocked, flew into a rage.
He took a plate of boiling hot soup and threw it directly into Thomas's face, shouting, "Eat those slops yourself."
Try to put yourself in that exact moment. You have hot soup dripping off your face, gording your skin.
The instinct is anger, defense, maybe even striking back.
But Thomas simply absorbed the humiliation. He calmly wiped his face and moved on to the next door without a single trace of anger.
He utilized the immense mortification he practiced in his solitary cell. He saw the hot soup as just another blow of the sculptor's hammer.
Forging his humility, the man's anger couldn't touch his internal peace.
This radical behavior was grounded in an equally radical theology of love for sinners.
He didn't just want people to stop sinning so society would be orderly. He desperately wanted them to take refuge in the heart of Christ.
He begged them in his writings, "If you will not be saved by the blood of Christ's body, have mercy on yourself by the blood and water that flowed directly from his heart."
He described the heart as a refuge big enough to contain all saints and sinners.
And to prove just how desperately he wanted souls to accept this invitation, he makes a theological statement that is almost terrifying in its selflessness.
He wrote that he was so perfectly resigned to God's providence that if his going to hell rather than heaven would somehow bring God greater glory, he would gladly choose hell.
He wrote that he would be content to go to the eternal flames and pray continually there to glorify God, if that yielded the greatest glory for his Creator.
I really want you to pause and think about the immense weight of that statement.
This is a man who spends his entire life fasting, scourging himself, and praying in freezing caves to attain heaven.
And yet he reaches a point of love that is so detached from his own self-interest, he offers to surrender heaven purely to increase the glory of God.
It is a level of raw, burning authenticity that strips away every single layer of religious transaction.
He is operating purely out of love. He wants nothing for himself.
This complete absence of self-interest is exactly why he became so massively influential.
People recognized instinctively that he had no hidden agenda.
And this captured the attention of the most powerful, insulated people in Europe. It elevated him from a local beggar to a trusted counselor of state.
That transition takes us to the year 1619. Thomas is sent by his superiors to Tyrol in Austria.
The historical backdrop here is incredibly tense. It is the era of the Protestant Reformation, and the devastating 30 Years' War is raging.
The Habsburg Empire is desperately trying to maintain Catholic unity. And into this geopolitical powder keg walks our illiterate Capuchin friar.
He was sent to Tyrol specifically to help preserve the Catholic faith among the populace.
He traveled across the mountainous region, preaching eloquent yet incredibly simple talks to all classes of people.
He earned the title the Holy Brother of Tyrol and became known as an angel of peace in a time of chaos.
Because of this profound insight, he was brought into the highest, most exclusive courts.
He became a trusted spiritual counselor to Archduke Leopold V of Austria and his wife, Claudia de' Medici.
He advised Emperor Ferdinand II.
He served as a spiritual director to the Prince Archbishop of Salzburg, Paris von Ladrin.
These are the men who are commanding vast armies and shaping the very map of Europe.
And when they needed guidance on the state of their souls, they sought the counsel of a man who washed dishes in a friary and couldn't spell.
He also guided brilliant intellects, like the renowned scientist and court physician Ippolito Guarinoni.
And he guided the young mystic Bernardina Floriani through her complex spiritual experiences.
He even drafted moral concepts to be used against heretics. But the sources make a very specific note.
Even when he was arguing fiercely, he never lost his charity. He remained fundamentally focused on love.
It is an unbelievable trajectory.
Yeah.
From the isolated sheep pastures of Olera to the opulent imperial courts of Vienna and Innsbruck.
But the most profound validation of his life doesn't actually happen in the 17th century.
It happens more than 300 years later in the marble halls of the Vatican.
We are speaking of Pope St. John XXIII, Angelo Roncalli.
The historical connection here is deeply profound. Pope John XXIII was also a native of the Bergamo region in Italy.
The exact same rugged region where Thomas was born centuries earlier.
In November 1959, the Pope was gifted a newly published copy of Thomas's book, Fuoco d'Amore.
The Pope recognized the book and the author immediately. He had known of this obscure lay Capuchin since his own youth.
He kept the volume prominently displayed on his desk, right next to his daily prayer books.
He openly declared Thomas to be a saint and a true master of the Spirit.
The Pope noted that Thomas had to have been directly led by the Holy Spirit to write such perfect pages of orthodox doctrine without any formal education.
But the most striking moment of this connection occurred during the final days of Pope John XXIII's life.
As he lay on his deathbed, preparing to cross from this world into eternity, he made a very specific request.
He asked that copious passages of Blessed Thomas's writings be read aloud to him.
Think about the incredible contrast of that scene. You have the Supreme Pontiff, the most powerful man in the Catholic Church, lying on his deathbed in the Vatican.
He has immediate access to the greatest living theologians, the most polished academic treatises.
And yet, as the world fades away, he chooses to seek comfort in the ungrammatical, dictated words of an illiterate 16th century shepherd who spent his life begging for bread.
It is the ultimate, undeniable validation of Thomas's inner life. The Pope recognized that the fire burning in those pages was authentic.
He wanted to warm himself by that fire before he died.
It synthesizes the magnificent legacy of Blessed Thomas of Olera perfectly.
He was a man utterly, completely consumed by his vocation.
His early biographers noted that at the end of his life, his physical body was completely worn out. He had pushed it to the absolute limit.
He could barely stand, he could not sleep, and he could not take food. His intense prayer became his sole nourishment.
They wrote that he practically died from an excess of love.
His physical frame simply gave out under the sheer, crushing weight of the immense, agonizing love he carried for God and for humanity.
He died in Innsbruck on May 3, 1631.
As we wrap up this journey, it forces us to confront a startling historical paradox regarding how we remember the past.
For centuries, brilliant academic scholars have written massive encyclopedias of highly polished, impeccably argued doctrine.
Many of those heavy books are now completely forgotten, sitting unread in dusty archival basements.
Yet the dictated, ungrammatical, emotionally overwhelming ramblings of an uneducated shepherd begging for bread in the Alps survived for 400 years to comfort a dying pope.
It forces us to wonder if the truest depths of history are preserved not by the intellect, but by the sheer eruptive force of a burning heart.
Thank you for joining us as we explored the remarkable, enduring life of Blessed Thomas of Olera.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.